Well, love it or hate it, Rotten Tomatoes is a pretty massive part of the film industry. It just is at this point. It's a huge website, and films will use it in their marketing, in trailers, and in commercials. Not sure about trailers, but in commercials for their movie. I've also, I do know that like people will look at a Rotten Tomato score before deciding if they should see a movie or not. In fact, I used to do that pretty significantly. This is the movie I want to see. Oh, it has a low Rotten Tomato score. Well, maybe I'll see something else instead. But I kind of want to start off this video by maybe giving a hot take, and I actually don't have an issue with Rotten Tomatoes as a website. I think my issue is with how people view Rotten Tomatoes and really kind of with how people view movies in general. And so that's kind of what I want to get into in this video. Quite frankly, I just see some memes online that kind of bother me a little bit about Rotten Tomatoes. I'll see people saying something like, the two things I typically see are like people that say, you think that the, audience score is the better way to look at movies? Well, look at this movie that had a good audience score but a bad tomato meter score. Or like look at people, and then people say the opposite. Oh, you think the critics are always right? Well, look at this movie that's I don't think was very good, that had a high critic score but a low audience score. That's the first debate I constantly see. And the other thing I see is if someone says, oh, I really like this movie, I thought it was good, and someone else might respond, you like that movie? It had a 52% on Rotten Tomatoes. So like, what are you talking about? How did you like that movie? Clearly it wasn't very good if almost half of the critics didn't enjoy it. But this is my kind of pushback and why those things bother me, even though they're opinions plenty of people have. It's talking like that almost assumes that movies are on a sliding scale. Like a 100% movie is this great masterpiece, and a 0% movie, well, I guess a 0% movie would be bad, but like a 20% movie is inherently worthless and shouldn't exist, or a 50% movie is inherently worthless and shouldn't exist. Let's take this movie, Synecdoche, New York. It's a Charlie Kaufman movie that I would really recommend. It's, maybe my favorite movie ever made. I think it's fantastic, and I'm not the only person who feels this way. A lot of people also believe that this is a masterpiece and just an incredible work of art. It's also a bit of a tough watch at times. I mean, it's going over very heavy themes of, dying and living a worthless life. It's very art house and isn't something that when you go into a movie, it doesn't give you a typical movie beats that you might expect from going into seeing a movie. So because of that, it's going to turn some people off. If you look at Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 69% on the tomato meter, which is not a great score, right? Like in the 60s, that's usually you want something a little bit better than that if you're hoping to get a good Rotten Tomatoes score. If we compare that to, I won't name any particular movie because I don't want to offend anyone who likes that movie, but if there's a movie that has a 95% on both critics and audiences, I feel like some people will say, wow, that must be a masterpiece, even though it's totally possible that it might just be a bunch of people saying it's like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. In fact, I've even seen people say like, man, I thought that movie was like a 6 out of 10, but it has like 98% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I kind of want to say, well, yeah, like then you agree with the Rotten Tomatoes score, like you're on the same side. I think the debate a lot of people have, though, is like, okay, well, then what movie is better? The movie that has mass appeal and 98% of people like it, or a movie like Synecdoche, New York, which 30% of people might just say, I'm out, this sucks, I don't want to deal with it, like, this is not something I want to watch. But then, maybe out of the 70 people that like it, maybe 40% of those people are like, hey, this is pretty good. And then, the other 30% are like, oh my God, this is amazing, one of the best movies I've ever seen, like, it's changed my life, I want to see it 10 more times. I think most creative people would rather make a Synecdoche, New York than the mass appeal movie that everyone forgets about the next day, but that movie is just almost always going to have a lower tomato score. Like, that's just kind of how that works. I mean, take this movie channel, for example. I'm talking about the themes that, and the things that I find interesting about movies, like Rotten Tomatoes, like, giving movie reviews. I've done some tier lists. Those are the things I find interesting. For example, I don't tend to watch a lot of like superhero movies, so I haven't really talked about those on this channel. If you're someone who wants to see someone talk about superhero movies, this isn't a channel you're going to tend to want to pay attention to. Therefore, you're not going to like this channel, and you would give it a rotten review on Rotten Tomatoes if you were to, because it's just not something that's interesting to you. But that doesn't mean that what I'm doing is inherently like bad, or that someone who likes this channel is like stupid because of it. It's just different taste. And I think that people often forget that movies are subjective. And when they look at Rotten Tomatoes, I think there's often like sometimes a confusion of like, wait, but why is this movie in the 40s, but I liked it? Well, I've watched movies that I think are great that have been in the 40s in Rotten Tomatoes and probably lower. I've seen movies that are in the 90s that I did not enjoy very much. That's part of just being a movie fan, is if you watch enough movies, you're going to have those experiences because of the subjectivity of movies, and because maybe there's a movie that has a niche audience, but you happen to be in that niche audience. Bringing up Synecdoche, New York again, I mean, that's a movie that I straight up, like, very few people in my life would I recommend this movie to. I have shown it to some people and they've enjoyed it, but like not everyone. I certainly, have people in my life I wouldn't show this movie to because it is a bit of a tough watch, even if I think it's amazing. And that's why I get kind of annoyed when I see these arguments of like, well, what should you pay attention to, the audience score or the critic score? The answer is, which one do you tend to prefer? That's the one you should pay more attention to. There's a tweet I've seen get a few times get reposted where it's like, I can't tell you how many times I saw a movie, liked it, and then looked on Rotten Tomatoes and saw it had like 40% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I kind of want to be like, okay, that means 40% of people who are paid to watch movies also agree with you and liked that movie. Like, why are you taking that as such a negative? And so because of this, I think people will often say, well, this is the issue with Rotten Tomatoes, is it's saying that you should go for mass appeal. You should, try to make movies that aren't super deep because it, gives you a high tomato meter. And in some degrees, in some ways, that's true, right? I do think the issue is, partially now you see a lot of film studios trying to make sure they just make a movie that can get you to that 6 out of 10. Don't say anything too outrageous. Don't say something that's going to piss people off, even if it makes the movie better, because it could hurt the tomato meter. I'm sure that there is something to that. But I just have to say, if you're sitting here and saying, oh, well, this is the problem with the tomato meter, is that higher percentage movies don't necessarily mean that they're better movies, I would once again say, I think you're using the tomato meter wrong, because I don't think its job is to tell you how good or bad a movie is, because I don't think it can tell you how good or bad a movie is. Like, let's just say, simply put, 69% of people found positives out of Synecdoche, New York. That's true. 69% of critics, I should say. 71% audience score. So right around there, that's how many people found some value out of Synecdoche, New York, which means that if I go in and watch that movie, there's probably a 70% chance I'm going to give it a positive review. That's how I kind of view Rotten Tomatoes. Now, if I'm looking for a movie that I want to be awesome and change my life, let's compare that to Hitman. Hitman just came out. I see it I have the Rotten Tomatoes page pulled up. I see that it has 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. A movie I liked, I gave a positive review. But if I'm looking for something that's going to change my life, and like I see one with a 70% and one with a 95%, I don't think one is inherently more likely to be a life-changing masterpiece than the other. However, I would say that if it's Christmas and there's a bunch of family over and I'm like, which movie should I put on? Hitman's probably the one that's going to be a bigger crowd pleaser, and also be a very depressing holiday if I'm watching Synecdoche, New York with my family. So that as well might factor in. So yeah, kind of long story short, to recap, I don't think movies exist on a sliding scale of, movies are either like a 1 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. Movies can exist that way to you. My ratings are my personal feelings towards each movie. So like for me, Synecdoche, New York is a 10 out of 10. Doesn't mean it is that's just what it is as a movie. That's my feelings towards that movie. Just because a Rotten Tomatoes score is, pretty high does not mean that the movie itself is better than a movie that has a lower score, but it does mean that if you haven't seen either, you are probably more likely to at least get something positive out of the movie. But hey, for me personally, sometimes I want to see a movie that might be more challenging and might not be for everybody, because if it is for me, I'm going to get more out of it. So that's how I view the site. I don't have an issue with Rotten Tomatoes, but I do have an issue with how a lot of people use it. Those are my feelings towards Rotten Tomatoes. What do you think of all this? Hopefully it made sense. I feel this is like my fourth attempt at trying to record something coherent about this. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.